Tonight, we begin with a collapse that Pentagon officials, Israeli intelligence, and Gulf state analysts had feared, anticipated, and prepared for. A strategic unraveling that unfolded not over weeks or months, but in 72 hours. 72 hours that shattered Tehran's carefully constructed regional architecture. 72 hours that left over 120,000 Iranian forces cut off from command and resupply. 72 hours that may have fundamentally altered the balance of power in the Middle East. What Iran did this week crossed a line that Washington and Jerusalem had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, the response did not hesitate. Israel, backed by intelligence from multiple allied nations, responded with precision, coordination, and overwhelming strategic force. For 18 months now, there had been signals not from official government channels, not from formal diplomatic communiques, just signals that Iran was preparing something unprecedented. Iran has been aggressive, yes, but they have been calculated in their aggression. Their moves have followed a certain rhythm, a predictability, almost a choreography. But what set off alarm bells in Washington and Tel Aviv this month was that the rhythm went silent. Intelligence analysts who monitor IRGC communications know the indicators. The encrypted burst transmissions between Quds Force commanders, the movement of senior officers between Damascus, Beirut, and Tehran, the sudden repositioning of missile batteries along the Iraqi-Syrian border, the unexpected rotation of naval assets in the Strait of Hormuz. All of that went quiet. And whenever Iran goes quiet, it means something is about to get loud. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was preparatory. It was the kind of operational security that only precedes major action. For years, Tehran had maintained what analysts called strategic ambiguity, keeping its regional forces dispersed enough to avoid a single catastrophic strike, yet coordinated enough to project unified power. That balance was about to be tested like never before. Early Tuesday, satellite reconnaissance detected what analysts described as unprecedented force concentration patterns, including movements of Quds Force advisors that had not been observed in over 15 years. These are the kinds of deployments that Iran only executes when they are signaling something very specific. Imminent offensive operations, a show of force designed to deter adversaries, or preparation for a strategic gambit that could reshape regional dynamics. Western intelligence didn't know which category this fell into or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that Iran was changing its strategic posture. And when a nation with Iran's capabilities shifts posture without explanation, even by small degrees, every intelligence agency in the region pays attention. The movements weren't subtle. Convoys of military equipment streamed across the Iraq-Syria highway. Hezbollah units in southern Lebanon began repositioning away from Israeli monitoring stations. Houthi forces in Yemen suddenly went dark on previously tracked communications channels. Something was being coordinated, something big. And then the picture became clear. Iran was attempting to consolidate its regional forces into a unified command structure capable of simultaneous operations across 5 countries. It was ambitious, it was dangerous, and it was exactly the kind of overreach that creates vulnerability. The warning issued by Washington tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Official after official in classified briefings described Iran's move as reckless, provocative, and perhaps most importantly, operationally exposed. The consolidation that Tehran thought would project strength had instead created a target. But strategic maneuvering only works if the adversary hesitates. Israel did not. In fact, their response over the past 72 hours was among the most comprehensive military operations we've seen in the modern Middle East. Here's what we know. Within 6 hours of confirming Iran's force consolidation, Israeli Air Force jets launched from multiple bases simultaneously. These weren't the routine patrol flights that occur daily along contested borders. These were coordinated strike packages, integrated air operations that Israel only deploys when they are preparing to fundamentally degrade an adversary's capabilities. The targets were not random. They were surgical. They represented months, perhaps years, of intelligence preparation, command nodes, communication relays, logistics hubs, ammunition depots. Everything that connected 120,000 Iranian-aligned forces to their leadership in Tehran. Tonight, multiple intelligence sources confirmed that Israeli forces launched precision strikes on over 47 critical nodes, including the primary Quds Force Coordination Center in eastern Syria that had recently been expanded for what analysts believe was this exact consolidation effort. Israel struck before Iran could activate its integrated command network. They hit the communication backbone connecting Damascus to Tehran. They hit the logistics corridors running through Iraq's Anbar province. They hit the weapons storage facilities that were likely preparing to distribute advanced missiles to forward positions. In other words, Israel targeted the nervous system of Iran's regional proxy network, the infrastructure that would have made coordinated multi-front operations possible. This is what made Washington's warning so urgent. Iran's consolidation wasn't just symbolic, it was actionable. It represented the kind of move that could trigger a regional conflagration if left unchecked. And Israel, understanding that fully, responded with force. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't strike population centers. They didn't target Iranian soil directly. They hit command infrastructure. They hit logistics networks. They severed the connections that transformed 120,000 scattered fighters into a unified fighting force. And in doing so, they turned Iran's greatest show of strength into its most significant vulnerability. And here's where the story becomes even more significant. Intelligence analysts now believe that Iran's consolidation was designed to test the resolve of the Western alliance after months of diplomatic fatigue and domestic political distractions. Tehran wanted to see whether Washington would counsel restraint, whether Jerusalem would defer, whether the Gulf states would remain silent. But instead, the opposite happened. Israel didn't hesitate. Washington didn't restrain. The response was so swift, so coordinated, that even hardliners in Tehran noticed. You don't get the supreme leader's attention easily. But this week, Israel did. Defense officials speaking with international media under anonymity described Iran's strategic shift as overextension, a way to project power through consolidation while actually creating operational dependency on vulnerable infrastructure. But Israel proved this week that they remain both capable and willing. Their strikes were not only precise, they were sequenced so effectively that Iranian commanders reportedly couldn't establish communication with field units for over 18 hours. That communication blackout matters because it shows something that Tehran has long feared. It shows that Israel is not merely reacting to Iranian provocations, they are anticipating them. They are positioned inside Iran's decision-making cycle, striking before Tehran can adapt. As reports continued coming in throughout Wednesday and Thursday, we learned more about the scale of the Allied response. Israeli Air Force conducted over 200 sorties across Syrian and Lebanese airspace, forcing Russian air defense systems to remain passive to avoid direct confrontation. American naval assets in the eastern Mediterranean repositioned to provide early warning coverage and electronic warfare support that degraded Iranian radar capabilities. Gulf state intelligence services, operating through previously undisclosed coordination channels, reportedly provided real-time tracking data on IRGC logistics convoys. This wasn't just an Israeli operation. This wasn't just a limited strike. This was regional coordination. This was Allied integration at a level not seen since the Gulf War. And that integration is the one thing Iran has struggled to counter since its proxy network began expanding in 2011. For every base they have established, Israel has mapped its vulnerabilities. For every supply line they have created, Allied intelligence has identified choke points. For every communication node they have built, electronic warfare specialists have developed targeting solutions. Remember, Iran thought the world was distracted. They thought American attention was focused on domestic politics and European tensions. They thought Israel was consumed by internal divisions. They thought Gulf states had resigned themselves to accommodation. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. America is engaged and providing critical support. Israel has demonstrated capabilities that exceeded even optimistic assessments. Gulf states are coordinating at unprecedented levels. And 120,000 Iranian-aligned forces are stranded without communication, resupply, or strategic direction. The regional architecture that Qasem Soleimani spent 2 decades building is experiencing its most significant disruption since his assassination in 2020. What makes this moment so dangerous and so consequential is that Iran's consolidation happened at a time when Ayatollah Khamenei is under extraordinary internal pressure. Hardliners want escalation to demonstrate strength. Reformists want de-escalation to preserve economic recovery prospects. IRGC commanders want resources to maintain their regional network. Ordinary Iranians want relief from sanctions and economic isolation. Khamenei is balancing these demands while managing serious health concerns and succession planning. And when leaders in that position make sudden moves, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from vulnerability. The consolidation wasn't confident expansion. It was defensive posturing disguised as offensive positioning. Tehran needed a win. They needed to demonstrate that their regional investment was paying dividends. Instead, they've received the most significant strategic setback in a generation. Washington's statement, now distributed through official diplomatic channels to over 40 allied nations, was designed to signal that America is not willing to accept Iranian regional hegemony. State Department officials said plainly that Iran's forced consolidation was inconsistent with regional stability and international norms. That is diplomatic language for, we see what you're doing, and we will not allow it to succeed. You don't usually hear that tone from Washington unless something serious is at stake. The statement went further, explicitly noting that American assets would remain positioned to support allied operations for as long as necessary. That's not a vague commitment. That's a strategic guarantee. And it's the kind of guarantee that changes calculations in Tehran. Meanwhile, Israel's prime minister addressed the nation in a somber, determined speech tonight. He said, "We did not seek this confrontation, but we will not avoid the responsibilities it demands." He said, "Every Israeli should know that our forces acted with precision, professionalism, and purpose." And he said, "To our enemies, hear this clearly. The era of unanswered aggression is over. We see you, we reach you, and we will stop you." These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a nation that understands just how high the stakes have become. Israel has made clear that Iranian consolidation will be met with disaggregation, that attempts to unify proxy forces will be countered with operations designed to isolate them. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. Iran's consolidation wasn't isolated. Along with the primary force movements in Syria and Lebanon, Houthi forces in Yemen simultaneously increased drone production and launched probing attacks against Saudi border positions. Iraqi militia commanders held emergency meetings in Baghdad, reportedly discussing activation of sleeper cells. Hezbollah's naval unit increased activity along the Lebanese coast, testing response times of Israeli monitoring systems. All of this happened within the same 72-hour window. When Iran moves multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. The question now is whether Tehran will attempt to salvage its consolidated position or cut its losses and order dispersal. Neither option is attractive. Consolidation has been exposed as vulnerable. But dispersal would represent an admission of defeat. Khamenei faces a strategic dilemma with no good options. Intelligence analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Iran is preparing a retaliatory strike designed to restore deterrence credibility, likely through proxy attacks on Israeli or American assets in the region. Another is that Tehran is attempting to negotiate a quiet de-escalation through back-channel communications, seeking to preserve what remains of its regional infrastructure. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that Iran is attempting to accelerate its nuclear program as compensation for conventional military setbacks, calculating that nuclear capability would restore strategic balance. But today, Israel took that card off the table. They didn't just strike proxy positions. They didn't just hit logistics nodes. They didn't just degrade communication networks. They demonstrated reach and precision that extends to any target Tehran prioritizes. The message was unmistakable. Acceleration will be met with prevention. What we're watching now is a test of resolve. Iran wants to see whether the Allied response represents sustained commitment or temporary intensity. Israel wants to show that their operational capability is not a one-time demonstration, but a permanent condition. Washington wants to prevent regional escalation while maintaining pressure on Tehran. And Gulf states want to prevent becoming battlegrounds for a conflict they didn't choose. The next 72 hours will be critical. If Iran attempts retaliation, the cycle intensifies. If Iran retreats, the regional balance shifts decisively. The world is watching. Tonight, we've heard from intelligence sources who are now monitoring Iranian emergency communications. They say IRGC commanders are struggling to reestablish contact with field units across Syria and Lebanon. They say logistics convoys have halted, uncertain whether routes remain secure, and they say Tehran's decision to consolidate forces is now being questioned at the highest levels of Iranian leadership. But Israel is not resting. In fact, Israeli forces are maintaining combat air patrols at unprecedented levels. Their response this week, swift, precise, and strategically comprehensive, sent a message to Tehran that consolidation will be punished. And it sent a message to Washington that Israel remains the most capable American ally in the region. As the days go on, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Iran hoped to achieve with this consolidation. But what we do know is that the Allied response was timely. It prevented the activation of an integrated proxy command network. It degraded Iranian logistics and communication infrastructure that took years to build. And it demonstrated that Western intelligence penetration of Iranian operations exceeds what Tehran believed possible. What happens next will depend on what Iran does in the coming days. If they escalate, this moment will be remembered as the beginning of a broader regional conflict. If they retreat, Israel and its allies have already shown they are prepared, capable, and determined. They have shown they are ready to respond. And tonight, for the first time in years, Iran appears to be uncertain. The Quds Force headquarters is quiet, too quiet. And when Tehran is quiet, it means they are recalculating. It means they are choosing their next move carefully. Because tonight, Iran learned something they have learned before but refused to accept. That regional overreach creates vulnerability. That consolidation without air superiority is exposure. And that 120,000 forces mean nothing when they cannot communicate, resupply, or coordinate. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. Khamenei's regional grip has never been weaker. Iran's proxy architecture has never been more fragile. And the forces Tehran spent decades cultivating have never been more isolated. And we will be here, watching every detail as the next phase unfolds.